Right. Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? Thank you very much for joining me yet again. We have got hopefully quite an interesting webinar for you today. This has been kind of massively oversubscribed, which is great to see. But it also just shows the massive interest that there is in data, analytics, understanding insights. It really shows how we've come on with technology from a day of just sort of break fix and looking after IT and thinking about IT being our word processor to now really being a fundamental part of us transforming our business and trying to improve operations and streamline processes and improve profitability, things like that. So really, really great to have you here. Hopefully, as we go through this doesn't lose too many of you, but it might get a little bit technical at times, so don't worry too much. And we will be showing you some sort of live generation of Power BI reports and bits and pieces later on. So just to give you a quick rundown of what we're going to talk about, we are going to talk about data, because in order for us to get to the bottom of understanding why we need tools like Power BI, in order to allow us to get insight from our data, we need to understand what data is. We probably need to understand what Power BI is. We'll be showing you how to create that basic report. We'll be setting your aspirations, hopefully, in a bit of an art of the possible with a report that's more complicated and a bit more advanced. We'll be talking about this concept of data lakes and why that's important, and also a couple of the challenges that you may face if you want to try and roll this solution and start to engage with data within your organization. Some of the hurdles and obstacles that you might want to maneuver around, and hopefully we can give you a little bit of insight into that. And as always, we're going to have time for questions at the end. Now, something just to point out is that whilst I'm talking, there is a chat option on the right-hand side. So if you've got any questions as you go through, feel free to fire questions in there as they come to you. Sadly, I can't see those questions as I'm talking, but when we get to the end of the webinar, I'll run through those and we'll answer whatever I can answer for you, okay? So we're going to dive straight in. In order really to kind of get going, the reason you're all here is not to talk to me about spreadsheets. You're not interested in the raw data. You're interested in getting insights. You're interested in understanding the overarching message that data is telling you across your organization. The aim really is to present you with what we call a dashboard, similar to something that you can see in front of you right now, which grabs bits of data from all over the place, from all parts of your organization, and funnels it all together, aggregates it together, and presents this sort of overarching high level numbers. Maybe these are KPIs or kind of SLAs or whatever it is you might refer to, in order that you need to be able to meet maybe the financial targets, etc., etc. So the aim here is to end up with something that looks kind of half pretty like that. I didn't make that, and it's not that pretty, but it'll do. So, but we're aiming to present a dashboard. I just want to give you an idea of where this has been really successful in the business before we get into the nitty gritty. So we did a great piece of work, if I'm honest, around this with one of our customers. That were effectively looking at increasing profitability, operational success, quality, all the things that they do within their organization. But they wanted to have visibility of that. They needed to be agile. They needed to be able to manipulate and move and tweak things within their organization quickly. They were a kind of a rapidly growing SME. They were doing fantastic work, absolutely swamped with new orders and new opportunities. And they needed to know where they needed to grow at the right time in order to really drive profitability within their organization. And obviously, as their organization grew, they potentially would like to sell that one day or do something along those lines. And having access to data, having access to really show where enhancements in changing processes or where they're particularly profitable and going hunting in that direction makes that company way more valuable. And I'm sure those of you that are business owners on the call will be aware that being able to deliver that sort of level of information at the click of a drop is very, very interesting to things like private equity organizations. They'll be kind of hitting hard to present that information on a monthly basis. If it takes you a month to get the data together, similar to sort of situations of many of our customers, it takes you a month to get the information together. You need a full-time person just pulling this stuff together through Excel spreadsheets just to keep your PE house happy. Something like Power BI could be a whole nother half or maybe even a whole multiple on the value of your business if you can get that sort of stuff correct. So there's some really good examples of what we can do. And if you're interested in that, please come and talk to us. But I want to start really getting into the weeds of it. Before we can think about those bigger pieces, we need to understand some of the ground rules. Things like what is data? Okay, and when I talk about data, we all know that a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, we would consider data. Lots of columns and rows, numbers, bits and pieces in it. But when I talk about data, I mean lots of different things. I mean files and folders. I mean databases, okay? I mean things like APIs and infrastructure where there are third-party services that have lots and lots of kind of external bits of data that are relevant to your business. So maybe you use things like Salesforce, maybe you use MailChimp, maybe you use a hosted Trello platform. Whatever it might be, there's data about your business being collected and used inside those environments. And you want to grab that information in and so that you can analyze it and make decisions on it. So as we're looking at here, we're actually looking at a Power BI import menu there. You can see that we have files, we have databases, we have something called Microsoft Fabric that's listed there. Lots of different databases, as you can see. So we're not limited to just SQL for the techies amongst you. We've got things like the Power Platform. We'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. We've got Azure, again, for the techies amongst you. Lots of Microsoft. This is Microsoft's cloud solution. It's called Azure. We've got lots of online services. And as I go down, you'll see things like Salesforce there, Google Analytics, if you're measuring activity on your website, maybe. Loads of different third-party services, MailChimp will be in there, etc., etc. And all of these things plug straight into Power BI. You can go and grab data from these areas and put it together. But data alone is not enough, okay? When I look at a spreadsheet, it gives me lots of information, right? It gives me loads of numbers, but it's an overwhelming amount of information. And actually, is it the data that I'm interested in, or is it things like trends? If I'm looking at a spreadsheet that shows me, you know, all the sales we've done in the last month, am I interested in the number of sales that we've done in the last month, or am I interested whether that is going up or going down? And if I'm looking at 1,000 rows of data, it's really not very easy to tell whether that's going up or going down. So actually, what we're asking for is insights. We're looking for trends. We're looking for the making sense of this mess of data that we may well have. And that's the big difference between data and insights. And we'll refer back to that a few times as we go through this webinar, okay? So that's what data is. We're used to seeing our spreadsheets, and potentially within your finance team, you probably build graphs in Microsoft Excel. Maybe you've got pivot tables, bits and pieces like that. But actually, that's great when you've got all your data in Excel. But what happens when your data is actually sat in Salesforce as well? Well, then you're probably going into Salesforce and exporting information out, copying it, putting it into Excel, and then analyzing that information. Well, there's a much smarter way of doing that, and this is where Power BI comes in. So BI is standing for business intelligence, and that's exactly what it's designed to do, is to find those trends, to find that insight within your raw data. There are three parts to Power BI, and sadly, we're just going to run through this quickly so that the rest of this webinar makes sense. So don't worry too much that we don't go on about this for too long. But Power BI Desktop is kind of where you build your reports, okay? It's where your analyst, where your hobbyist may be jumping in and creating various widgets, dragging little kind of visualizations with graphs and charts, and dragging bits of data in. And you can use it at the most simple level, or you can get extremely advanced with it. And you can even do things like transformations where we're making our own data based on the data we have underneath. Once we've generated our report inside Power BI Desktop, we publish that to the Power BI service. And that's the web-based version of Power BI, where users can log in, get access to those reports, and we create things called dashboards. We'll dig into that in a second. And then thirdly, obviously the user that's connecting, one of the great things about Power BI is that it actually is able to kind of responsively change the way that your report is rendered so that it fits on tablets and mobile phones. So it always looks decent rather than us looking at a spreadsheet and trying to zoom in on my iPhone. It's going to be in a nice, clear, presentable way in a nice visual style. So skim through this really quickly, but bottom line is to start with, to get to a kind of completed Power BI report, there's a few things we're going to go through. We're going to grab some data. We're going to connect it to Power BI Desktop. We're then going to go through this mode of transforming that data. So in other words, we're using Power BI Desktop to maybe tweak some of the data, maybe remove some outliers, things like that. We're then going to create visualizations and drag those things into a blank canvas. We're going to publish that to the Power BI service, as we mentioned a moment ago, and then users can gain access to it, or we can distribute it to them directly so they can see those reports. So to give you an idea of start to end, these are the processes that you're going to look to follow and go through. So digging a little bit more detail, and Power BI Desktop, that was the thing that I mentioned is where we build our reports. And you can see here there's a picture on the right hand side, and this looks a bit like an Excel spreadsheet, doesn't it? Okay, in terms of we've got graphs and bits and pieces that we can create in Excel. It is very different though. So you start with a really blank canvas and it's all drag and drop. So it's what we call very low code or almost no code. So you, from the right hand side, we grab a visualization, we drag it in and we drop it on a canvas, and then we drag and drop data values into various columns, and it starts to render our visualization. And we're going to show you that live in a second, okay? But Power BI Desktop is all about building that report and actually being able to then save it and move it on. If you want to go and get started with this, by the way, very, very quickly, if you go to powerbi.microsoft.com/desktop, it's free to download. Go to that website, click download, install that on your computer, and you'll have the Power BI Desktop. And that's the software that we're going to use to show you how to do something. So if you do want to have a go at it, please go for it. You can also go to app.powerbi.com. In the top right corner is a little download button. You can download Power BI. And once you get going, the little window on the right hand side is kind of the first screen you expect to see. So if you get to that, you've installed it successfully, and it's asking us to go and get some data, and we'll talk about that again in a second, all right? So slight difference between the Power BI Desktop and the Power BI service then is that the service is what's running in the cloud, okay? This is where I publish my reports to once I've built them. Doesn't necessarily mean that the data is then just being published out in the cloud for anybody to go and access. We've still got security, we've still got logins and requirements to be able to view these reports, and I can control who can see and have access to reports, so don't worry about that. But the big difference here is that in Power BI Desktop, we're building reports. We publish those things to Power BI Service. In the Power BI Service, we have this concept of dashboards. So on the right-hand side here, it looks very similar, but these are actually widgets and individual widgets that are being pulled out potentially of multiple reports. So this is about having that high-level view. You might have lots of different dashboards that all sit within some sort of workspace. In a second. But effectively, we've got things like total stores there, this year's sales, and they may all be coming from different reports behind the scenes, but I can bubble them all up into a dashboard. And as I click on one of those tiles, it will take me to the underlying report behind the scenes, and I can dig around and start to filter and do bits and pieces and the fun stuff that we'll show you in a second, all right? So a bit of a difference between two things, so try not to get too confused by those things. And this is the workspace piece. So the way that Power BI Service works is I build a workspace, I create dashboards inside those workspaces, and those dashboards are effectively a collection of widgets that are sitting outside reports, just to explain the hierarchy. So, boring stuff over. We've done all the definition stuff, okay? So we've got some idea now of why and how we build a Power BI report. And we are going to do kind of focus on the building of that, because probably the best way to get started with this is just to give it a go, okay? And see what you can come up with and see where you get going. And this example that I'm about to give you with building a basic report is all about going and creating some data, connecting it to Power BI, and then building some basic visuals. Okay, and in a minute, we'll talk about some slightly more advanced stuff. So how do we get started with Power BI? Right, we start with data, okay? So as you can see here, I've got a spreadsheet. It's all the same sort of thing that we'd expect to see. You can see that I've got columns across the top. I've got lots of data underneath it, various rows. But as I'm sure you'd agree, it's very hard for me to get any sort of idea of trends through those numbers. It's just lots of numbers in my mind, all right? I can spot that this is probably a lot of data showing me laptops or products that we're selling in various countries and into various industries. But if you ask me now quickly by looking at that, whether that's a trend that's going up or a trend that's going down and roughly how many we sold, I'd have to start creating graphs and charts and filtering and all those sorts of things. So what I want to be able to do is just take that raw data. I'm not an Excel expert. I want to lift it up and I want to put it in something that's easier to use. And that's where Power BI comes in. And remember, we're looking for the insights, not just the data. So I've opened up Power BI Desktop here, okay, and what I have is a few options about getting started and what I can create. So I can go and create a completely blank report, or I can start with a set of data. For the techies, you can do this from SQL. For the non-techies, we can relate probably better to an Excel workbook. So what I'm going to do is pick with an Excel workbook. I'm going to start with some data. This is the spreadsheet we saw a second ago. I'm going to choose that data. And what's going to happen is Power BI is going to go off and read that information. It's going to pull it in. It's going to start to analyze it. So you can see that it's looking at that data. It's going to calculate how many rows there are. And it's going to basically build some kind of model behind the scenes so that we can reference that and pull bits of information in at any point we like and attach it to various visuals. It does take a minute. The more data you've got, the longer this process will take. It's not infinite, but there's about 700 rows here. So if I tick the little sheet 1, you can see that if I have multiple sheets, it'll have lots of sheets in there. But there's the data we were looking at a moment ago. It's in the same sort of structure. It's worked out my headers. It now understands, how I refer to those columns. And I'm going to load that data in. And we're going to end up with, hopefully, it being pushed into our Power BI platform. So looking at the wider thing, you can see on the right-hand side that the Power BI desktop environment, we've got data on the right-hand side. So this is where we're going to, once it's loaded, we're going to be able to go and analyze and look at some of our data. The middle piece in the middle is visualizations, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you can see that Power BI is building our model. That's what we call it when we're stitching data together. And this is very simple stuff, okay? So I appreciate if you've already done this, or you already have played with Power BI in the past, hopefully you're fairly comfortable with what we're showing here. But hopefully if you haven't, then you realize it's not that hard. So you can see that when I expand my data now, I've got all those columns that I had in my spreadsheet. And in the middle, we've got a sort of blank canvas, and then we have these visualizations that we're looking at here. These are graphs, charts, pie graphs, funnels, anything that I want to kind of start to use, right? So let's get started. We're going to create a pie graph. So I'll just click on the pie graph option, and I can see, drag and drop. I can resize my pie graph to whatever I need. And then I go over to my data, and I just tick sales. Okay, so this is going to be a pie diagram showing the number of sales. All right, so you can see there's 118.73 million sales. But what I want to do is compare that against the countries that those sales are in. So I've dragged country and dropped it in the legend. And now I can use the legend down the side to individually pick countries. And very, very quickly, it's showing me some trends. It's showing me those insights into that raw, horrible data that we had underneath. And it's now broken it out into all of the revenue amounts that we've got in each thing. This time, we're going to create a funnel, and then we're going to have a slightly different set of data this time. So again, I can resize that. I can drag it around. You can see how easy that is to use. And this time, I'm going to pick sales again. So let's put that into my values, the sum of all the sales. And then this time, we're going to choose something a little bit different. So let's go and pick the product, okay, as effectively our category. And you can see this time, it's broken all of my products down, all my laptops that I've got. So my Lenovo, my Apple, my Acer. But the key here is that you'll see that it's responsive. It changes when I click on elements within a visualization. So if I want to know how many Lenovo laptops we've sold into each of our regions, you can see that the other graph, even though I clicked on Lenovo laptop on the item on the right, the left one's responded, and it's now showing me the revenue that we sold within each of those regions. Okay, so it's really quickly allowing me to see the insight inside the data, not just the raw data itself. Okay, and it's being able to add that up. And as I click on a country on the other side, the graph on the right-hand side starts to react and change and manipulate. So I can see the amount of products that we've sold, how much revenue of each product we've sold into each region. So that's quite a complicated thing to go off and do inside Excel, but very simple to do with Power BI. So we all have a line graph. So let's put a line chart in there, or whatever you want to call it, line graph, line chart. This time we are going to go and grab our sales. We're going to put that along the y-axis. So that's the amount of volume of sales that we've done. And this time I want to know, when are we selling these things? Okay, so we've got 3 bits of information, the same kind of sales data, but cutting it 3 different ways. So now when I click on the United States of America, you can see that my line graph at the bottom changes to show me when we sell our items through the year into each of those countries. And at a glance, I can also see the products that we've sold and the revenue within that. So how long did that take us? Literally 2 or 3 minutes to pull in a couple of graphs off the back of a simple Excel document. And that's perfect. Probably for an individual, you realize how useful for that is for yourself. If you're going into a meeting with your manager, with maybe you've got a sales meeting, maybe you're hitting a board meeting, and you're going to be asked some questions about analytics and performance within your team. Then as long as you've got that raw data, remember we didn't do anything to that raw data. We just had a bunch of data in a spreadsheet behind the scenes. You can actually start to deliver that. So if someone challenges you with a strange question inside your meeting, the chances are you can click on a couple of things and have it live and change in front of you and answer those questions for you very, very simply. So at a personal level, really, really useful for you to use, on your own. You could, of course, scale this out into a wider part of your business, but you're probably going to start to want to get better insights than just how much, what product we sold into what region. Okay. And we can go much, much further than this with Power BI. All right. We can do all sorts of things like Power Query, which we're not really going to dig into today. But what I'd like to do now is kind of show you the art of the possible, an advanced report, something that's way more complicated and has a lot of other functionality in it. We're not going to have time for me to show you how to build that, obviously, but it'll give you a bit of a taste of where you could go with this. So, and the key thing we're looking for in this advanced report is not just basic kind of cutting and slicing. We're looking to identify trends. We're looking to get insight. Okay, so not just the raw data behind it. So let's take a little look at this one. So it's a little bit more complicated, so I will explain it slightly. But this is kind of again a sales dashboard showing the performance of individuals, showing the devices that we sell on the right hand side. We start with some kind of big numbers across the top: the revenue won, the qualified pipeline, the revenue goal. So again, this is showing sales forecasting here. So a bunch of devices down the right hand side. We're looking at the location using that map of the USA down the bottom there. And you can see that as I start to click on things similar to the last report, all my other visuals start to perform and react to what I'm selecting. Okay, so if I wanted to see the e-reader there, I can see where it is in the sales process using that top left box showing our qualifying, developing, proposing, or closing it. And where in the country it's being delivered. So you can see lots of data being shifted around there just by me clicking around and getting a feel for it. But something that Power BI is really good at doing is manipulating that data, transforming it on the fly. What if our sales team have actually underachieved this month, or I'm worried that they are going to underachieve? Well, I can adjust our forecast so that actually all the other visuals can shift down. So you can see the right-hand side is a slide bar. I can slide that up and down to what I think they're going to predict to do in terms of sales. And my rest of my graph is then going to reflect that, so I can budget and I can forecast a little bit better when I present my information to the wider team. We've also got lots of other visuals that exist. So again, here we've got our win-loss overview here. And this is not specific. You have to have a win-loss overview, obviously. It's just we've created one. So here we're looking at all of our orders. We're looking at the revenue that's currently open, the forecast that we're going to do it, and what's the probability of closing that opportunity. Listing out customer information, details, etc., and also look at our kind of our sales team, so Peyton and Ethan, etc. One thing that's really, really cool is that it will also give us a bit of a narrative at the bottom there. So you can see that Peyton Davies is the highest close percentage for a manager at 69.2. We haven't typed that in. That's Power BI looking at the data and returning a natural kind of description of our data set. So if you do board packs and bits and pieces, you want to analyze that, brilliant at doing that. And then, of course, we could cut it again and we could say, well, let's have a look at the industries, because all of this data is underneath the platform. So I could start to say, well, what are when do we sell to our major banks? Okay, well, actually, it looks like we're selling a lot more into the computer software area. There's a bunch of opportunities. Our total banks, in terms of what we're winning, isn't massive. Maybe there's some reasons behind that. Maybe it's a time of year thing. Maybe our campaigns aren't particularly good. We need to ask some questions. So let's look at some trends then, all right? And maybe it is that year of that time of the year thing. So you can see here that I've got a widget here showing when we make our sales. So in the life insurance sector, we've got lots of sales happening in December and January, and then it's sort of petering off for the rest of the year. Okay, no problem at all. But what about the computer software side of it? Well, that's an absolute reversal almost, isn't it? So we've actually got almost no sales at Christmas time, and then it peaks up again early year and dies off again. So when I think about that, what I want to be looking at is, when should I do my marketing campaigns, and which sectors and industries should I be marketing into? Because it sounds like we want to be marketing in either at Christmas to get more sales into the right teams, or maybe we need to be doing it at the times of the year when we're not actually performing quite so well. The last piece of the puzzle is insights, all right? Not just trends, but to give you much more detail. You can see here in the middle, and probably the point I want to draw your attention to is what influences the status of a record to be won. And it's working out a percentage of reasons why things have happened. You can see there that the first one is the campaign quarterly sales contest happens, okay? If a quarterly sales contest is happening, this is telling us, we're going to sell a lot more. That means that we're pitting our sales team against each other and they're all racing to try and close opportunities. Might not be the sales methodology you want to follow, but in this scenario, that seems to work. And as we go through, we can see all the other things that haven't worked. I can change that and I can flick it around to what influences an opportunity to be lost. And you can see there that if there's no campaign, seems to be the biggest reason we lose stuff. The third option is actually the owner is Jeff Hay. So actually, maybe that's the salesperson or maybe that's the customer, whoever. If the salesperson is Jeff Hay, there's a 1.74 times chance that we're going to lose the opportunity. So maybe you need to be looking at that individual and saying, do we need to train? Do we need to improve? What do we need to do around that user? And that's just coming from your raw data, all right? That's coming from sales information about revenue, things that have been sold, things that have been closed, won, etc., etc. So there's a huge amount of stuff that you can get in terms of insights beyond just kind of what you're having with a normal basic report. Something that's very, very powerful though is the ability to ask questions of your data. And this again is a fairly advanced setting. But here, I don't have a widget. I don't have a visualization maybe to answer some of these questions. So I'm going to use a Q&A section of the advanced report to say, what was the revenue won? I'm just going to throw something basic in to start with, right? Revenue won, 26 million, okay, across the data set that we've got. Brilliant. Okay, well, that's good, but I want to ask a bit more detail now. So I'm going to say revenue won by average deal size. It's about $3,500. No problem at all. Maybe I want to dig a bit further. So I'm now going to say revenue won by owner. So this is now a list of owners and the revenue that we tie against a particular owner. But I haven't created a widget to do this. I'm just asking Power BI to give me that information and it's going to return it to me in a way that kind of makes sense. I could even ask it how much revenue we've done in various states and provinces. And again, the bigger the circle, the bigger it goes. Now, I can also type in something that maybe it can't answer. And at that point, I get nothing. All right. So it's not AI, this. Okay. This isn't artificial intelligence. It's a fairly limited set of things that you can ask it that maybe make sense. But as it will always give you a bit of a helping hand. As you start to write a question asking it for a bit of insight, it will drop down some ideas of things that you can ask it. But it's not Copilot. All right. It's not AI randomly doing stuff. And I'm going to show you a little example of that in a few minutes. Okay. So I think the takeaway that really we need to understand there is that basic report was based off of one Excel spreadsheet. That advanced report is not based off of one Excel spreadsheet. Okay, it's based off of information that's come from the finance department. Okay, or maybe out of the finance system. It's based on information that's come out of the sales system potentially as well. Because actually, if we're comparing proper revenue, actually what we're doing, what we've actually sold, it's fair to say that the sales forecast and what the sales potentially sell might not actually tie up with what you end up invoicing the customer. Things change, the opportunities shift, customer asks for other things. So it's not always true to say that the information inside your CRM, if you're just using it with your sales team, is exactly going to marry up with what the finance software says. So which data are you going to use? What's right and what's correct? So we need to aggregate data together. This is where we come into the world of combining data sets together. So aggregating data. The aim of aggregating data is to have a single source of truth that holds all your data across your environment. And we may well need to use tools or a process like exporting and transforming and loading data. What we mean by that is pulling data out, exporting data, manipulating and changing it. So actually maybe by taking that data from Salesforce, manipulating it to match what's happening in the finance system, and then loading that back into a Power BI platform. But the question is, where do we aggregate this data together? Now, probably the most sensible place to do this is to use something called a data lake, okay, where you can actually aggregate bits of information together or bits of data together. And at this point, it is just data. So the picture you can see in front of you is effectively a database. It's got a little C symbol in the middle of it because it represents a wave, because it's a lake. And the reason we call it a lake is because this data has no structure. It's just purely raw. Salesforce, there's no relationship in this scenario between Salesforce, MailChimp, and Microsoft 365. When we throw the data into a big reservoir and it all just kind of flows over each other, there's nothing stitching anything together at this point. And the reason for that is that potentially if we have an account in Salesforce, let's say we've got a customer, that customer will exist in Salesforce and it will have a unique Salesforce number assigned to it. The same thing will happen in MailChimp, okay? So It will have a customer record in MailChimp, but again, it will have a unique MailChimp record associated with it. And there's nothing really tying these accounts together. So, but logically, as part of our business, we know that potentially, as part of a maybe a marketing exercise, we're going to take a customer from our Salesforce CRM database. Okay, we're going to then use Microsoft 365 to generate maybe some marketing collateral, some sort of email campaign, whatever we want to do. And then we're going to use MailChimp to send that email. So these things are actually all linked together in terms of our marketing process. So how do we link them together? How do we make sense of this so that I can ask a question that's of Power BI and it returns me information about maybe where the customer was in Salesforce. It gives me all of the information about the customer because that's stored in Salesforce, their location, their address, their email address, etc., etc. I want to understand what campaign we sent, or maybe that information is stored in Microsoft 365. And ultimately, I want to know when the mail campaign went out. Well, that information isn't stored in Salesforce, that's stored in MailChimp. But I want to be able to view all of that in one view. That's why we need a data lake. So the way this works is we effectively transform the data. We create our own tables, our own records, and we stitch these things together. Without getting too technical, we've got a contact ID maybe in Salesforce and an account ID in MailChimp. Effectively, we create a little table that links all of our users together, and we give it our own unique ID, and we reference that unique ID going forward. So I'm not going to hang on that too long, pretty technical. Happy to have a chat with you if you want to get into that, but let's move on. So what we probably need to understand now, you've seen how to create a basic report, you've seen how to create a really advanced report, you probably understand the value. Now, the value you get out of those reports is only as good as the information that you put into it. It's only as good as understanding the questions that you need to ask your data to understand where you're improving, what you need to change, etc., etc. Okay, in this scenario, what I've decided to do is bring up three kind of examples, right? So a sales dashboard and management accounts example, and then just talk about some of the challenges we've got. So let's pretend for a moment, as an organization, you want to deliver some dashboards around the sales team, right? The sales leaders, your sales director perhaps, they said, right, I want a single view of sales. All right, that's kind of the comment. Just, I want a Power BI report that tells me how good sales is. Right, so the sales team maybe has to go and sit down with the IT department. It's quite common that the IT department end up with this kind of sitting on their lap, if that makes sense. But actually, the IT department don't know how the sales team run, potentially, okay? You need that engagement from both sides, from both parts of the department. So the sales work with the IT to define questions and understand what the IT team needs to respond. And we've also got the Power BI dashboard then being created. Who's going to create that? Is it the IT team? Is it somebody that you've got within your organization to actually kind of develop that and move it on? So, but the challenges you're going to get, right? If you're going to use data from this environment, what data you're going to use? Back to the point I made earlier with if the information is coming from your CRM, is it correct? If the information is coming out of Salesforce, is that the right data to be looking at? If we're looking at forecast, what the sales team have put in terms of what's being closed, maybe as an opportunity, then effectively what we actually want to be looking at is what have we got inside the finance package and inside the finance system. Maybe that's a much more accurate reflection of what we actually need to be reporting on rather than the information inside sales. So I challenge you to kind of question whether the data that you're using is correct, whether it's clean, all right? Is it correct? Has the information been put in? Again, let's pick on sales a bit, all right? I love doing that because I'm a technical person. So let's pick on sales and say, actually, they're busy people. They're out all over the country. Did they have that 5 minutes as they were dashing between meetings to make sure the information they put in the system was accurate? Because if they didn't, and it didn't go in properly, then effectively the output of your report could be totally skew-off and totally wrong. So how are you going to change your own internal business processes to make sure the information that goes in so that the information you get out is accurate, all right? So think about some challenges around what you do with a sales dashboard, all right? Another really good example, something I asked a lot, is to create dynamic management accounts, all right? So effectively, we've got people across the organization that maybe the CEO is expecting the management accounts and the board are expecting the management accounts at the end of the month, and it takes maybe a week of somebody in finance's time to compile that, and it takes 6 or 7 hours of maybe some other sort of senior department heads or heads of department to collate their information and feed it back to finance so they can feed that back to the board. The dream, of course, and we've done this a few times, is to create dynamic management reports where it actually goes out and grabs information out of your finance system, out of your ERP system, out of your ops side of the business, maybe out your sales team, and generate that information back so you can have live dynamic management accounts. You just click on a button and it genders all the information for you. So that's great. So the CEO's brief in this scenario is, I want a real-time view of the organization's performance in terms of our management accounts. Now, that's great. CEO knows in his head exactly, or he or she knows in their head exactly what that report is going to look like. Okay. So the plan here, the solution is to get the finance team, again, to probably go and work with IT, build a Power BI dashboard. And in this scenario, we could probably bank on that data coming from the finance system. So we've got a solution. We need to build a Power BI report based on finance that meets the CEO's expectations. So the big challenges are, is the brief complete? Do you actually know effectively what you need to report in the management account? Because if the finance team aren't involved in it and the IT team are building the management accounts based on a report, do the IT team know what EBITDA is? Do they understand how you calculate that? Are they going to be able to do that? Is the information that's going to come back going to be correct again? You probably need involvement from the finance team. Now, is it on the top of the finance team's agenda? It might be if the CEO is requesting it, but it might not be born out of just desire from one of the sales team. Again, it might not be the finance director that's actually driving that. It might be one of the team within the finance side. Again, do they have all the knowledge and expertise to be able to formulate that and understand how you bubble up to a number? Again, the IT team are going to hit terminology and functionality like journaling, for example, they might not understand. So, have you got the right setup in place to do that? What does the CEO actually want? Now, it's great if you've got your own management accounts, but that might not be in one document. That might be in a whole bunch of different things, a bunch of different reports coming from various places. How are you going to aggregate all that together into a single report? And again, who's going to do that? And who's going to make sense of that stuff? And even if you spend, let's say, 3 months building these management accounts, you put it in front of the CEO and they say, I don't like it, I hate it, it looks rubbish, it doesn't make sense, the numbers are all wrong, etc., etc. Okay, so you just wasted 2 or 3 months building a solution that didn't actually work very well. It might leave a bit of a bad taste. So, and obviously the last thing is to think about, how valid is the data? If you've got a live dynamic management accounts, and the CEO jumps in on it on the 14th of the month and wants to look at a snapshot of where the business is, well, how do you know finance aren't doing a lot of journaling? They haven't done end of month yet. They haven't closed anything down. They haven't adjusted anything to make sure that it looks correct at the end of the month. You're kind of mid-month. So how are you going to deal with that? And how are you going to kind of lock that data down so that the report shows the same thing for 31 days or 30 days or less, maybe in one case, where effectively the report that you're getting is fairly static, right, in that scenario? How do you manage that? How do you get the data out? Where does the data need to come from? So it's not quite as simple as kind of what I'm getting at as just firing up Power BI, dragging a load of data in. It's great for you personally, but when you're trying to integrate lots of people across the organization, lots of data from different data sources, it becomes a bit more complicated. And you have to ask yourself whether you've got the right skills and team around you to do that. All right. So a few challenges for you to think about. All right. I've said it a few times. The data you get out is only as good as the data that you put in. If you've got bits of paper floating around where people are filling in bits of information, maybe on a paper document, and they're filing it, how are you getting that data into an electronic form? Have you thought about that? Do you need to do that? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do for various reports. How do you know it's consistent? If someone's sat there typing in someone's handwritten notes, is that consistent? I encourage you to go and look at other ways of gathering information from your organization. If you've got people that work in the field, for example, maybe look at things like Microsoft Forms, okay? If you've got paper-based forms that you use today at the moment, or you've got a third-party application dealing with some of that information, how are you going to get the information out? But you could use Microsoft Forms to ask the questions. They take a tablet, they take their phone, they type it in, it's captured, it's digitized straight away, and it can be fed straight into the system, right? So look at where data goes into your organization as much as looking at how you get the data out. We're taught all about how we get the data out and not very much about how we get the data in, because if the data in is rubbish, what you're going to get out is going to be inaccurate and not much use either. So challenge that, challenge your organizational processes, understand how data moves around your business in order to get the most out of this. Defining the requirements is critical to the success of dashboards. So this goes back to that idea of, do you actually understand the person that's going to get that report at the end? How do you know what it is they're after? So encourage you again to go and scope that, all right? And basically you create a form, you ask questions, you challenge the person that wants the report around what it is they're looking to as an outcome. Maybe get them to draw a picture of what they can see in their head, if they want it to look like. Weirdly enough, visualization is everything in many cases of a Power BI report. It's got to look half decent, otherwise people don't use it. So understand intimately the expectation that is kind of being set around the report, the data that's coming out of it, but more importantly, the trends that they're looking to find, the insights they're looking to find. We can all open a spreadsheet and look at data. We can't open a spreadsheet easily and look at trends and insights. And the last question is just to challenge whether or not this is something that you have the skills to do in-house. If you're going to build lots of reports and this is a real mission for you going forward, then it might make sense to employ somebody to come in and work within your team, within your organization, and do that. Obviously, once you've started to build a lot of those reports, you need to think about, well, is that person going to be busy enough after that? There's probably always going to be changes and tweaks and bits and pieces once you've built your reports. Maybe having a contractor makes more sense to come in and actually build a lot of reports and then just come in on a regular occurrence and come and tweak those things and make adjustments where required. So ask yourself whether that's the right role, whether that's the right person. Also, who's going to be accountable and responsible for generating that data? If you've got people within your organization that are kind of process analysts, people looking at how things move around your business, perfect person to get involved in this kind of project so that they will understand how things move around the business and how the relationships exist between different departments and their data. So Power BI is just one of the many things within the Power Platform. Okay, we mentioned, obviously we've got Power BI. Something that we didn't talk about was the fact that you can actually, if you joined a previous webinar, we did something around Power Automate, which is in the middle of the screen there, where you can automate processes. And Power BI can actually be a trigger for that. So when particular stats or numbers change, maybe you're looking at SLAs where a particular bit of data exceeds a threshold, it can actually become a trigger to Power Automate to then go off and do a load of things automatically, all right? You can trigger emails, you can trigger kind of changes in process within your organization. So bear that in mind, but the Power Platform is a much wider piece that allows you to integrate lots of data in. It has Power BI, it has Power Apps inside there, which is about creating kind of rich web-based environments that you can go and engage with, and it plugs into Power BI beautifully. Power Automate, same thing again. Power Virtual Agents, kind of like chat-based systems. We've also got something called Power Pages now as well, which is great websites. And they all connect to things like the AI Builder and data connectors and what's known as the Dataverse and Microsoft Fabric underneath the site, underneath it as well. We're not going to go into that today. We're not going to get too technical, all right? So look, there's a huge amount of things that we can do, and I want to leave you really with the next step in this journey. All right, it wouldn't be a webinar from me if I didn't say the word Copilot. I think I've done really well to get this far without saying Copilot. But I want to leave you with what Copilot can now do inside Power BI. Okay, so little video for you.
Introduce BI. Copilot in Power BI empowers your people to unlock the full potential of your data and move from data to insights faster. Now, with Copilot in Power BI, you can use natural language to bring your data to life. Simply describe the visuals and insights you're looking for, and next generation AI will create your report and help you refine it. You can then dig into this data further by asking a question, and Copilot will find the best answer. Not only does Copilot help you visualize your data, but it taps into Power BI's advanced analysis capabilities to help you find key influencers and outliers and create forecasts. Copilot can summarize your data into easy-to-understand text narratives that help others quickly get important and relevant insights. And for analysts who are creating calculations and modeling data, you can simply describe what you want, and the code is automatically generated. With Copilot in Power BI, turning data into impact has never been easier.
So hopefully you can see there that some some really cool stuff, right? I mean, I get excited about Copilot and AI as much as anybody else. Again, all the risks and all the things that I've talked about before need to be considered when you start to put an AI engine into all your company's data. I'm not suggesting you just go off and do that blindly. But you can see that if you are challenged with how we're going to build a report, how, I haven't got 6 months to learn how to use Power BI. Copilot's going to get you there. Okay, it's going to help you build those reports, right? It's going to get you started for 10, as I always say, where it allows you to start to customize and change some of those bits and pieces, all right? So really, really exciting stuff. I think there's a lot more that we could talk around data, but the thing I want to remind you really is the power of data. And when I mean the power of data, I don't mean the physical ones and zeros on a spreadsheet. I mean the trends, the insights, what you actually can get out of it. When you think about how you compare two different separate platforms, if you've got human beings downloading reports, analyzing data, comparing it to something else, creating another third document, do away with that stuff, right? That's what Power BI exists for. It will help you understand where you're good at things within your business and where you're not so good at things within your business. Look at timings, look at logs, look at information from laptops, from servers, from systems, from SaaS-based applications. Understand intimately what those things do and how long it takes a process in your organization to happen. This will help you do that with Power BI. It will help you kind of improve some of your KPIs. So, and hopefully make you more successful, operationally streamlined, more profitable, maybe even worth more money one day, right? So look, I think we've pretty much hit the limit. I want to leave a bit of time for questions if there are any. As always, very few in there at the moment. You're letting me down, but I'm going to leave you there. So if you've got no questions, I hope that was useful to you. If you've got any more questions around Power BI, you want to do something a bit more in detail, maybe something more industry specific to what you guys are working in, please do reach out, because we're always happy to come down and show you some reports that are a bit more relevant. Obviously, that's very tricky to do with a wide audience from different industries. But if you've got anything that's relevant, then we can definitely come down and spend a bit of time with you. So other licensing costs. So depending on your Microsoft 365 license, you will have a certain level of access to Power BI. There is effectively a free SKU of it. But if you want to start to get into things where you're sharing large, very, very advanced dashboards with wider people and third-party organizations, yes, there is absolutely a cost to it. Again, you can find that on the Power BI website. So there's all the details. So I won't go into it now, but all the details are out there. Our web address. So what is our web address? It is www.tmtech.co.uk. So if you look at the email address, take the hello out, put www in front, you'll find our web address. Okay. But it's worth saying that there's an awful lot of functionality you do get inside your Microsoft 365 licensing already. So probably go and have a little look. Can you transfer data from zero to Power BI? Absolutely. Yeah, done it many, many times. So, so if you're interested in knowing whether there's a capability to drag data in, have a look at that third-party application. And the term you're looking for is API, an application programming interface. If it has an API, then you can actually connect to it and start to ask questions or drag data out of your cloud platform and bring it down. Now, typically, you'd bring that information down into a data lake, all right, so that you can analyze it against other things. If you just want to get started, another way of doing it is to kind of export, go into Zero, go into your finance package, file export and pull CSVs out and then import that into Power BI. But that requires you to do those things manually. And the aim here really is to not be too hands-on. So that's why you can go down the road of data lakes, this ETL process where automatically every 30 minutes, every hour, every day, it's automatically calling the third party's API, pulling down all your data and leaving it in a position where you can ask questions about it. Okay, but Zero absolutely works. Next question is, can Sage 50 accounts and payroll talk to Power BI? Same thing again, yes, absolutely, depending on which version of Sage you've got, in all fairness. So if it's an older version of Sage, then you may not have API access to it, but you can absolutely export that data. And now you can do that manually. So you can go and file, export, pull your data out. If you saw my last webinar, we talked about Power Automate. There's a tool within Power Automate called Power Automate Desktop, and that allows you to kind of record various screens, start again, record various screen clicks. So you could go file, export, choose a file name, type a number in, hit go and record that. And then it will just do that every month for you or whatever you need to do to pull the data out of an old legacy system if required, all right? So with SQL, does the processing happen within BI or does it query the database for everything? Right, great question. There's obviously somebody technical on the call with that question. So effectively, the difference between data laking and Power BI, it can happen in both, is the truth. So there's something called Power Query, which is baked into Power BI, which allows you to basically lump loads of data in and do loads of transformation and changes within the Power BI platform. Okay, and that will happen at the Power BI level. However, Power Query is nowhere near as quick as SQL. So if you can get your data into SQL and you effectively can create, when you pull your data out and you put it in a data lake, which is ideally based on SQL, big SQL database, you can actually create SQL statements, you can create queries, sets of tables that analyze and pull the data together before you get Power BI involved. But the truthful answer is you can do it in either. It's just if you do it in SQL, it'll be quicker, is the truth. Can you transfer zero payroll data to? Yes, absolutely. Again, so if it's got the API, 100%, you can grab the data out of that. So, so you should be able to export it and pull it down. If you can't, again, depending on what license you've got potentially, then you may end up needing to kind of export it manually out of the web front end. But there is an API, and we've absolutely done it before, and we can definitely take a look into it and see what we've got. And Terry's put, is it possible to replay this session? Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be available on our website. So team marketing, who stood over here, as you can probably guess, will be kind of cutting this video up, taking all the bloopers out, and then putting it up on the website so that it's available for you to consume at any point in the future. Any more questions? That was great. You're the best group for asking me questions, by the way, so far. So really happy with that. No problem. Right. Well, if there are any more questions that you want to fire at us, obviously, if you're an existing customer, please do feel free to reach out to your account manager. You'll all know that I'm always happy to come down and speak to you personally and have a chat about these things anyway. But if you've got anything else, feel free to hit our website. There's a live chat tool on there. You can always get hold of one of the team and have a conversation there. I hope it wasn't too technical and boring. Talking about data and numbers is never a particularly interesting thing, but hopefully we spiced it up enough to keep you engaged. So thank you very much for your time. All the best. See you later.